India some new books, and they'll be in your bookstore as soon as that can be worked out. One is a new edition of, you remember the book Tales from the New Life?
Yes.
We have a new edition of it.
Oh, you do?
It's much nicer, and it has,
Stevens with,
new introduction, timeline, and glossary, and things like that. The book has been unavailable for a while, so I just gave copies to Michael this morning. And also from India, 5 copies of In God's Hand. It's been out of print and unavailable in America for a good while.
Beautiful.
So these are 5 copies only. Grab them quick. There are plenty of them in India. One way is to buy them at the LA bookstore, and the other is to get a ticket, go to India, and buy it there. I think buy it here would be cheaper. Okay. Well, this afternoon is, I hope I can communicate this effectively, but I do think this is kind of the key to the integration of the earlier and the later. We'll see if I can convey this. So it's Meherabad's metaphysics, the everything and the nothing, and thinking the imagination. So I have 4 topics: the everything and the nothing, or light and darkness. Then thinking the imagination, and the role of imagination in Meherabad's Darshana. This is very central to In God's Hand. See, Pran and Akash as the primordial dichotomy within the imagination. There we're going to see a fundamental forking between thinking and imagination. And imagination has as 2 constituents, Pran and Akash. This is very important to Meherabad's Darshana. And finally, Meherabad's 2 creation narratives. Finish up on that. Oh, and I also just wanted to show you, these are some of the books that have been done according to what was described this morning. One is In God's Hand. Actually, that's what's now it should be available here.
5 of them, you said?
Huh?
5 of them?
I brought 5, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
from India. They're published over there by Meherabode is the name of the publisher. They also publish Tales from the New Life. The American print by National Line has been out of print for a while, but this is a facsimile edition, actually. This is the 39 pages in Meherabad's own handwriting.
You want to auction it right now? I can lead the auction.
All right. Oh, you can
Start the bidding at $5.
for the 5 copies. See how high up they go. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Seriously, how much are they?
I'm not sure. That's a problem. I'm just the carrier. I'm the donkey.
How do we get one of the 5?
Going to the bookstore.
Oh, the bookstore we can
Yeah,
buy?
I brought them. Tim said, "Yeah, bring them over." I gave them to Michael, and who is it? Karen or Tim and who are?
Yeah, Tim and Karen.
Yeah,
They may be here tomorrow. I don't know.
I doubt it.
Hopefully.
they
or
have
without.
COVID. Yeah,
Oh, so we can buy tomorrow.
yeah. You can just go in there and steal it.
Yeah.
Following the new LA tradition. Up to $995.
And make pile of sanskaras, huh? We're going to talk about sanskaras.
But then infinite intelligence, of course, I was talking about. This is a critical edition, And a critical edition is an edition based on a review of all known and knowable sources with a critical evaluation of them. Where you actually assess them, and with an apparatus that explains what these sources are and what has been done with them, and other source material like that. So the second half of it is full of information like that. Once again, I would anticipate a lot of people won't want to read all of that. Some will, though, but that information is all there.
Sometimes it's recommended to read all the way through Series 11.
What's that?
it's recommended to read that all the way to series 11, you know, the chapter 11.
Yeah, those are the most important.
After that, do you recommend to read more?
Well, there are only 3 more, they're not that long, and it's Baba's
okay.
complete thing.
Okay.
But, you know, an angel was whispering in my ear. You know St. Peter at the pearly gate? And, you know, after Muhammad, Ali wouldn't, he was the same role as Peter, but he wouldn't take the job. And Erich also wouldn't take the job. So Peter's still there. But he's been reading up. So he got infinite intelligence and Tiffin Lectures, and so when you get there,
He says Jai Baba.
that's the first thing. And then the second thing is he'll open infinite intelligence to page 289 and say, would you please explain the uses of the Turiya Avasta in infinite intelligence versus the chapter, the 10 states of God. And on one side will be an angel, and the other side will be a devil. I'm going to have to start doing this to promote these seminars.
With a laugh.
But I'd like to add that these books, like Infinite Intelligence and Tiffin Lectures, they were very expensive to print. They are legacy books. Give them to your children. They're going to be worth a lot of money in the future. Because there's never going to be a second print.
Okay, opening bid 150.
All right, you upped it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, In God's Hand actually was, yeah, I don't know, maybe a lot of you are not acquainted with the book. Let me just show you a little bit. This is, I mean, it's the first part of it
I got it.
is a facsimile
Yes.
reprint of Baba's handwritten
this is all
pages.
handwriting.
And then the second half reproduces it again in regular Roman font, and there are other things in it too. So if we're going to talk about Baba's words, and we have some real sticklers, well, you can't deny that those are Baba's words, because he actually handwrote them.
That's right.
If you want to take all the other books and throw them into the garbage, into the fire as apocrypha, well, this is the one that survives. Yeah, and then also, you know, I was talking about the discourses, but this is the revised 6th edition of the Discourses.
Yeah.
This is published 2007. You know, the 6th edition was published in 1967 with Don Stevens and Ivy Deuce as editors of it. But there was that question brought up where some people were criticizing the 7th edition. So the Trust said, okay, any of the original editions are eligible for republication, plus the 7th. So since the 6th was out of print and since the question had been raised forcibly and in a reasonable way, we republished this. But there is a 4th volume, and that has things, that doesn't have any, that's not Baba's discourse. It has a 80-page history of the discourses, and it actually has a glossary that goes over a lot of the vocabulary, including vocabulary from God Speaks, sort of correlating the use of terms across the Baba's different books. Anyone interested? I mean, there's significant stuff there. Okay, there's also, people tend not to know about this book, but Early Message, this is a critical edition also.
This is a very good one.
Early Messages to the West. And it has text of the messages Baba gave in 1932. There are 6 of them, major. So that part's not very long, but like that, you know, beads on a string message, some of you may know. I'm going to give you a little story about that on the matter of editing. That's a very famous message, and rightly so. Baba's introducing himself to the West. But when I was working on that, I thought, okay, it was, you know, it was delivered, you may have seen the film, where Charles Purdom is reading out from Baba's dictating. Sri Meherabode has come. That whole thing. And he reads out little snippets on the film from it. But I knew that he published it in the magazine that he was editing then called Everyman. And that was published in 1931. So I said, what could be better than that as a source, right? Well, I was able to get it. And Charles Purdom cut out a third of it, actually. He tended to do that. So then I said, okay, well, what about Kitty Davies' book, Love Alone Prevails? She was there. It was at her parents' house. What could be better than that? And it turned out that left out a clause also. So I wound up working with a 1943 publication by Adi. So this is to illustrate that, in this critical editing, you really do have to look at all. Those would have seemed to be the best two sources, and they turned out not to be. And that's why you really have to look at everything. But anyway, those are there. There's also Questions and Answers, it's called. There are other books by that title, but this was published in 1933 in London. So it's here. Also, The Sayings of Sri Meherabode. This was published in London in 1933 also. And there's a section, How It All Happened. And these are notes. This would be very relevant to Hollywood people like you all. I know you're all film stars, right, every one of you. But this Baba actually was creating notes for a film. And he came to LA in January 1935 to try to get the film made. And these are the notes which he had compiled. So all of this is, it's a critically edited text. And then there's...
Oh, wait, Ward, you didn't tell him my favorite part.
What?
The drawings of the extinct...
Oh, there's the bat bird.
The bat bird.
And the fish reptile.
Yeah, all these...
exotic creatures, You can see a drawing of the bat bird. Baba said it used to exist 15 feet high, ran 60 miles an hour. And the fish reptile, it's about 300 feet long with 3 heads. So he had someone draw them.
You actually drew them, yeah.
Yeah. I think Baba knew his LA audience very well. Dangle fish for a seal, Oh! Yeah, and then Tiffin Lectures was published. These are all critical editions, so I'm showing them. 2017, these are talks Baba gave to his Mandali, kind of for their spiritual training, I would say. I'd say definitely is that. 1926-27. And the last one is, and there's this too, which I forget, you have this in your bookstore, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of it?
Divine Theme.
A Divine Theme. This is actually a facsimile reprint of the original book, which was published during World War II. And then Creationist Causes is the last. So these are all critically edited texts. So this kind of work is being done right now. There's more project afoot, right now also. Okay. Now, what in a 6-session presentation or a 16-session presentation, as in Mirana, a whole session is devoted to the topic of the divine theme, and so I just want to be sure that you guys are, acquainted with what that is. You're acquainted with the divine theme. It is this narrative of the journey of the soul. So, and this, as best I know, Meherabode is the first one ever to have explained this. And Baba put it right at the center of his messaging, you could say, from very early through the end. It's I couldn't quite call it his most important philosophical idea necessarily, but I would call it the one that he put up front, the foremost. You could call it the biography of the soul, which means the biography of you and me made, right? It's our real story. So it begins with God's whim, where God asks, "Who am I?" And there's an explosion of bubbles, and the drop soul emerges as an individuated entity in the most elementary form. And then there is a journey in consciousness as the soul identifies with one form after another, with increasing complexity. And as it, with each new form, the experiences it gathers through that form register in the form of sanskaras. So the drop soul acquires more and more and more and more sanskaras, and it progresses. So the first stage is creation. The second is the evolution of form and consciousness, which is accomplished through sanskaras. And Baba listed the 7 great kingdoms of evolution: stone, metal, the vegetative, worm, fish, bird, and animal. So all of us have done this. It's actually, Baba said, you go through 84 lakhs of species. And a lakh is 100,000.
Lifetime. Human life right here.
No, but this is before that.
Oh.
You actually
Oh, before that.
There were 84 lakhs of species, and a lakh is 100,000. So 8,400,000 species through the course of evolution. So we're old.
And then lifetimes?
Huh?
And then human lifetimes? Oh my God.
No wonder you're so tired.
Yeah. And then after that, Baba said, when you achieve the human form, that's the third stage, which is reincarnation. Baba reserved the term reincarnation for what happens in human form. He didn't give a name to, but before that, you take birth again and again. He didn't call that reincarnation, though. Transmigration, we could call it, I suppose. But in human form, consciousness is complete. Consciousness is fully developed. You don't need any more consciousness. The problem is what you're conscious of. And what we're conscious of is what is put before our eyes by our sanskaras. So, by the time you've reached human form, even though the whim of God, who am I, was what prompted us on this journey, you don't have we keep misidentifying what it is that we really want. Instead of, I want God, it's like, if I'm a monkey, I want a banana, or I want to clobber this other monkey over the head, or I want sex, or I want to fight a good war, or whatever it is, all the desires. We misidentify what we want with these things. So in reincarnation, you begin this way and go round and round and round and round and round the cycle of karma. So it's actually, it's unnecessary in the sense that the reason you got sanskaras in the first place was to become conscious, right? So that you could answer the question, who am I? So when you become a human being, you actually have what you set out for, but because of sanskaras, we just cycle and cycle and cycle. That's the wheel of karma. 8,400,000 lifetimes in human form, Baba said. It's a long time.
What is the first samskaras? The first samskaras that were created? Is it
Well,
at the
that would
time
just
of-
be the experience of total grossness, infinitude. The firstmost form, the electron form. Yeah.
Oh, so it actually got produced when it took a form?
Yeah,
So there is a form necessary to make a samskara?
yeah, they all seem to have happened concurrently. The first identification with the first form produced the first sanskara. But then that's the third stage. So creation, evolution, reincarnation. But eventually the soul becomes dissatisfied with the reincarnationary process. And one way or another, you start to turn in, what am I doing here? as Abidus put it, or what is the purpose of life, or does God exist, or you start to become profoundly restless and asking questions like that, and that leads to the beginning of the involutionary journey, as Baba put it, where you start to get rid of sense. You find methods of getting rid of samskaras. We'll talk about that tomorrow afternoon. And there are, Baba said, 7 planes. The first 4 planes are in the subtle world, and the 5th and 6th plane are in the mental world. And you progress through them all until at the end you achieve, through the grace of a master, God realization, and that's the end of it. So the 5 stages are creation, evolution, reincarnation, involution, and God realization. That's the journey of the soul. And as best I know, Meherabode is the first man in history ever to have explained this. So one of the things he did as Avatar descending, I always think of like one of these folk tales where, you know, a little boy, baby boy is born, the son of a king, but somehow gets kidnapped and by pirates, and then brought up among, you know, poor fishermen or something like that, and goes through all the, you know, that kind of story. You ever read those stories? Goes through all these adventures and traumas and ups and downs until somehow he winds up in the home of the king, and the king recognizes him, and he said, "I want you to know something. I want you to know who you are." And in fact, is the son of the king and destined to become the king. Well, that's kind of what Baba has told us for the first time, who we are. We're actually God. And this is our story. So that is at the center of, Baba first related this in Infinite Intelligence. As far as I know, this is the first time in history this story was ever told. If somebody knows me wrong, I'd like to be corrected. But I really have looked for this in other spiritual literature before Baba, and I haven't found it. But, and then how it all happened, the movie Baba was going to make in Hollywood, with all of you as his stars, was going to be on this subject too, exactly on this subject. And in 1941, you know, Baba gave 8 discourses on meditation. I don't know if you're acquainted with those. In the discourses you'll find 8, and the 4th of them has a reading meditation, which Baba is offering to all humanity, and he has a whole process for how to use it as a meditation. Has anybody here ever done that?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I've never done it myself. He has a method for using it as meditation. Anyway, that's on the divine theme also. Also, Baba had a gathering in 1944 at Meherabad of 100 of his followers. And that was World War II. It was very hard to have gatherings then. You know, transportation was not available, food was not available, permissions were not available. But he somehow had it anyway. And what it was, the centerpiece was a meditation on a chart showing the divine theme. And he had a group meditation. It's the only time in Baba's life that I know of where Baba did that. Had a large group, not just Mandali, but a large group of his followers all engaged in a collective meditation. It was on the divine theme. And in 1955, Baba published God Speaks. And God Speaks is exactly an elaborated treatise on the divine theme. It follows that pattern all the way through. Chapters 2 to 7, he goes through the divine theme the first time. Chapter 8, very long, half the book, he goes through the divine theme a second time. And chapter 9, which is the 10 states of God, is once again the divine theme. So God Speaks is, the divine theme is its core. And the last writing of it that I do want to mention is Francis Brabazon's Stay with God, which Baba, I don't know if you're aware, but Baba praised it to the sky. And he said it was second in importance only to God Speaks. And that has as its third part a very beautiful poetic rendering of the divine theme. So if there is one single philosophical idea that Baba really wanted out there and up front, it was this. I did a whole 9-day thing on the divine theme at Nirvana, and there's much more that could be said about it. But I'm sort of skipping it here because there are other topics that would be, with which people would be less familiar. So now I want to come to the first of those topics, which is metaphysics, the everything and the nothing. I'll go right to this. Let's see. Yeah. So I put up on the whiteboard, wrote up these words: ontology and metaphysics. Right? Ontology is based on the Greek word entos, which refers to being, the study of being or metaphysics. So this is the inquiry into what really exists. And Baba certainly has a metaphysics, and it's quite developed and quite explicit. We'll find it, probably the most important treatment of it is in God Speaks, especially the beginning of chapter 8. But the key, I would say, the formulation that Baba really settled on features two terms: everything and nothing. And most Baba lovers know the everything and the nothing and the everything and all that stuff. But Baba used these as really philosophical terms. And I would be curious to know if those words were used as real philosophical terms before God Speaks was published. Anybody ever delves into that, I'd be curious to know. But Baba made them philosophical terms. And, here's a big division between the Abrahamic religions and Advaita Vedanta. You know, the Abrahamic religions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? It's a common term used for those religions. They're all part of a lineage in a certain way. And do you know Advaita Vedanta? Are you acquainted with that? Vedanta is one of the major schools of Indian religious tradition, based on the Upanishads especially. The Upanishads are the last part of the Vedas, they're called. And here is the essential, crucial insight that is expressed there for the first time in religious history. That is, that the soul and God are one and the same. Atman is Brahman. Atman is the soul and Brahman is God. And that was quite a revolutionary idea. And Advaita Vedanta, there are different schools of Vedanta, but Advaita Vedanta is the one that affirms that God is everything. And every soul is identical with God. And the other religions in general reject this idea completely. And to take the Abrahamic religions, all of them affirm that God is one. By the way, I put up this Islamic word, tawhid, which means the oneness of God. That was a huge development in all of these religions. They rejected polytheism, right? You know polytheism, they're many gods, many goddesses. I don't know if people study it anymore, but like in Jupiter, Juno, and Apollo, and Aphrodite, and Artemis, or the Latin version equivalents, or Norse mythology, Woden, or in India, Indra and Varuna and Agni, and there are all these different gods and goddesses. Well, it was really, you can read it in the Old Testament, where God had it in for all these other gods. And they completely rejected the multiplicity of gods and said, God is one. So that is right at the center of all the Abrahamic religions, right? Christianity certainly affirms that. It didn't do so well enough for Muhammad because the Trinity was a problem from the Islamic point of view. And they absolutely insist that God is one and there's nothing to put beside God. Okay? Huge theme in Western religion. Right? But there is this point, their conception of God is not the same as Advaita, right? Because God is separate from the creation. There's that crucial point. Like, God is one, but I'm not God. To say I am God is to invite trouble in a number of these traditions. I don't know if you've heard of Mansur al-Hallaj. He was a perfect master, actually. And this story may not be true, but it was told by Attar, another great master. And Mansur al-Hallaj went to Junaid, a perfect master. This is in the 10th century. And Junaid is one of the greatest of the Sufi masters. Most lineages trace back to him. And Mansur al-Hallaj was a perfect master who propounded sobriety, not drunkenness. There's this division within Sufism. The drunken approach to God and the sober approach to God. Right? You know what drunkenness and soberness is, right? So Junaid was of the sober school and did not accept al-Hallaj, who was the very opposite. So al-Hallaj went off, became a perfect master, and said all sorts of controversial things, including Anal-Haq, right? Anal-Haq means I am the truth, or I am God. And that's absolute heresy within Islam. So he was put on trial in Baghdad. And this is the story that Attar tells. It may be apocryphal, but it's a great story.
No, Esfandiar told us to.
Yeah.
So maybe true.
Yeah.
He told us about this.
Yeah.
Exactly same.
So when in the trial, the orthodoxy of Baghdad wanted Junaid to be one of the judges, because even though he was a perfect master, he was a pillar of orthodoxy. He was complete respectability within Baghdad. So of course they wanted him to be a judge. And he was very reluctant to do it, but finally he agreed. So this is the story. Okay, Junaid is a perfect master, and al-Hallaj was a perfect master, right? And al-Hallaj is saying, I'm God, which is totally, no. So somebody asked Junaid, he was in a judge's robe going to the courtroom, and somebody asked him, they say that some of these things that al-Hallaj is saying have a mystical meaning. And Junaid said, this is not the time for mystical meanings. Let him die. One perfect master to another, you know. So, what chance do people like us have? No. So, there you have, and he was put to death. He was crucified. In fact, the story told is they cut off his hands and feet.
And head.
And his blood on the ground spelled out in Arabic, Anal-Haq. And then when he died, they burnt his body and they threw his ashes into the Tigris River. And his ashes spelt out Analak. You couldn't shut the guy up.
Also, I heard that we were told that, they also cut his head and they put it in the water, they gave it to water, and all of a sudden there was about 5-6 more of those heads was displayed on the water. That I'm still there, although you cut me. Yeah,
And Hafiz, Hafiz, the great perfect master poet, the day that he was, God realized, Baba said anyway, he wrote, there are 2 ghazals from him, and in one of them, he says, something like this, my very blood on the earth would spell out, I am God, if I were crucified today like Mansur al-Halaj, something like that. So he actually quoted that episode the day he was God realized. So this is to illustrate that saying I'm God was a risky line to pursue if you are a Muslim. And I would say as a Christian, you would be looked upon with extreme disfavor, and Judaism too. And so in the Western world, I'm talking about ontology here, right? That God, even though God is one, God is separate from the creation, right? But in Advaita Vedanta, the soul is one with God. It was quite a radical new idea. And it's been central to Advaita Vedanta all the way through. Well, the reason I'm saying this is that Baba is definitely following the Advaita idea that God alone exists. God alone is real. But then you could ask the question, if God alone is real, then what the heck is all of this? Where did all of you guys come from if God alone is real? For that matter, where did I come from if God alone is real?
But you yourself is God.
Yeah. Lois, did you want to?
This just reminded me of growing up in LA, and the black community, but just not in LA. There was a preacher who called himself Daddy Grace and claiming that he was God. And then eventually, Daddy Grace died. And people started saying and laughing, how could he be God if he died?
Yeah.
And this is, it's sort of along these lines.
No, that's right. I mean, in a way, it contravenes common sense. It seems to be obviously false from the limited human standpoint, right? I mean, isn't that true? If God alone is real, well, where the heck is he? And what is all of this? It directly contradicts our experience. So this is something to be explained by people, by these schools. And here's another thing about that affirmation. And I think one of the reasons that the religions have mostly discouraged it, the idea that I am God is a dangerous one, right? Because it's one thing if I really am a perfect master, but it's another thing if I'm an ego tripper, If somebody started coming into the LA Center shouting, I am God, I am God, I am God, it might be looked upon with disfavor. I'd have to leave this up to you. Because, I accept it as true because Baba said it, but I don't experience it. And for me to say I am God is to deceive others into thinking that I have that experience when I don't. And it's a great trap. Baba really warned against it. So in other words, this is a very dangerous idea, actually. So usually the religions say, I am a slave of God, or I am nothing before the feet of God, because the ego needs to be crushed. But actually, it is ultimately true that I am God. I say this as something which Meherabode has said, not as something which I know. But then it does leave the question, well, how do you explain everything? Okay, so this is Meherabade's metaphysical account. Yeah.
Isn't it, I think it's, I don't know where it is, infinite intelligence or what, But isn't it this idea of I am God latent in every one of us, even in a stone?
Yeah.
It's already there. So maybe inherently we know that we're God,
Yeah.
but we're not conscious of it.
Yeah, God
Right?
is the real self, but we or don't experience that.
It's
Yeah.
like on a doormat. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. But this is Baba's basic metaphysics, right? And it centers on these terms, the everything and the nothing. And by everything, Baba referred to the reality of God. God is absolutely everything. But then Baba said, for everything really to be everything, it has to contain nothing too, right? Because if nothing wasn't there, it would get left out and everything would not be complete. So for everything to be everything, it has to contain the nothing within itself. But the nothing really and truly is nothing. Baba really, from early to late, from the 20s to the 60s, Baba kept insisting, the nothing does not exist. It is totally illusory. Valna too, I remember describing a time in Guru Prasad where Baba was in the 60s, Baba was talking about this and he was, God is everything. I'm sure he did a great gesture for it. God is everything, and he'd make a gesture and give you a feeling, everything. But then Baba said, Baba was suddenly perturbed by a thought that hadn't occurred to him before. But what about nothing? What about that? Baba asked everyone and then nobody could answer, so Baba, God is nothing also. And then Baba was kind of brooding, and then he said, and if anything has been left over, God is also that. So Baba would not allow the possibility of there being anything outside of God. So he's really an Advaita. Maybe I should write that up here. I will. Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means not dual, not two. And actually, you can see the English words in this. Means not, and Dvait means two. Our English word two is spelled T-W-O, right? In Old English days, they said it twa, dva. So it's related. Not two. So Baba is most definitely an Advaitin. So his account of reality is that God is absolutely everything, but for everything to be complete, it has to contain the nothing. But these aren't true opposites because the everything exists and the nothing does not. The nothing truly is non-existent. But what happens then when Maya and ignorance comes into play, and we'll say more about this, but the nothing manifests as nothingness. And nothingness projects itself as the false everything. So like when you're looking out and you see this room, and you see lights shining from there, and a whiteboard, and other people, what you're seeing is the false everything. And the false everything is the manifestation of the false nothing. And the false nothing is the manifestation of nothing with a capital N. So nothing projects itself as nothingness, and nothingness manifests on the screen of our experience as the false everything. Yeah.
So I think that I did my own translation of the nothing, but I always thought of it as like when there's no attachments.
Well, when you reach that stage, then you experience the nothing. Yeah. Nirvana, the nirvana state, you've heard of nirvana. that most rigorously speaking is the experience of the nothing with a capital N. So you could say that there are two real states, the everything and the nothing, both with capitals, right? But again, if somebody says, well, isn't Baba a dualist? He has the everything and the nothing. But the answer to that is the nothing doesn't exist. And Baba really was emphatic on that point. He would not allow that it exists at all. But once you cross the line into the illusory sphere, then nothing comes from what Baba called the fine state, the state of latency, into a state of manifestation as nothingness. In a nutshell, you could say this is our mind, all the crap in our mind. And that projects itself as the world before us, as the false everything. This, in a nutshell, is Meherabade's metaphysics. So these are the key terms. Meherabode made these foundational philosophical terms in God Speaks, especially the opening pages of Part 8. That's the most important treatment Baba gave. Everything equals the reality, God in the beyond state. Nothing equals the absolute nothing contained and inherent in the everything. Nothing is the divine vacuum experienced in nirvana. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the divine vacuum? Isn't it equivalent to Fanafila?
It's
In
fana.
that instant,
It's not fanafila, it's fana.
It's fana.
Not fanafila. In fanafila, you experience the everything.
Oh.
But in the divine fana, you experience the divine vacuum.
So this divine vacuum, is it, where is it exist? Is it in beyond state before the urge happened of who am I?
No, it's not in the beyond state, because in nirvana you experience it with consciousness, whereas the beyond is unconscious. Baba said in nirvana, okay, I won't go into it, it gets too involved. But nirvana you experience the nothing, actually, in its pure form. And nothingness is the false creation manifested out of the nothing. Now we're into the illusory sphere, right? And again, you could think of this as all the forms of the mind, right, in the mental sphere. Fifth and sixth planes, all that's there, it's manifested now, although most of us are not conscious of it. But when that projects out into the world before our eyes, like in the gross sphere, that's the false everything. So, false everything, though God Speaks does not use this term, it would refer to the manifestation of nothingness as apparent but false everythingness. So these are the four key terms, yeah.
I don't know, but I'm a little confused by all the brackets and the equal symbols.
Um,
No, I'm kidding you. I'm kidding. You went through that whole thing earlier with all the brackets.
well, I'll put it in this form. How's this?
Oh no, go back to the other one.
Yeah. No, I just created this. No, equals means it's the same thing as, or it can be defined as, yeah. And I put it in brackets just because God Speaks doesn't use that term, but it uses terms much like it. Did somebody want to say something here?
Yeah. So basically, Baba wanted us to know God Speaks very well, correct? Because he wrote that first. And
Right.
then came the creation and its causes.
Yeah.
And in creation and its causes, it's very interesting and it's very up to date, but I don't know where the mirrors comes and how we can relate the mirrors into the, because Baba never talks about mirrors in God Speaks.
No.
And like right now when you're explaining about the nothing and everything, does it have to do anything with the mirror?
We haven't
The mirror
really.
is in the creation.
All right, there are mirrors in infinite intelligence with Jamshed's eye. Are you thinking of that section where you look in the mirror and see your reflection? Mirror? Are you saying that word, mirror?
That's my confusion, the mirror.
Yeah,
I don't know
that we'll have to
where
get.
they are.
We'll have to get to a move further along before we get to that. Actually,
Yeah.
yeah. No, the idea of mirrors is more developed than this. Is kind of the very metaphysical basis. We haven't even got the Jivatma yet.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah. Now,
Why,
yeah.
where do we read about false everything? In Infinite Intelligence?
Well, a lot of
The
this
previous
is.
one, the last one.
I mean, infinite intelligence goes into this, but really those pages in God Speaks, I know they're very difficult. There's no doubt about it. But that is the most important treatment of this, is to be found there. But here's the explanation Baba gave in the barn. I always marvel. I think Al-Ghazali would have been beaming on this. Remember how bewilderment?
Yeah.
How he thought. So Baba's explained this to, the barn in 1958. Ever see any films of that? Those people don't look to me like champion metaphysicians. They look to me like regular Americans in the 1950s. And Baba hit them with this anyway. So I bet they were totally bewildered, and Al-Ghazali was saying, yeah, Baba, go hit him with it. So this is Baba's explanation here. This is short but difficult. Those who cannot follow it must not worry. It is nothing but words. Only love counts. If the most unintelligent one can love me as I ought to be loved, he is infinitely more blessed than the most intelligent one who does not know how to love me. So in other words, Baba is saying, if you're bewildered, don't worry about it. Nirvana and Nirvakalp. Nirvana is the experience of the nothing, and Nirvakalp is the experience of the everything. Nirvakalp is the I am God state. Fana, that's annihilation. The final fana is nirvana. This is a Sufi term. Is the state of unconsciousness. In fana, the soul is unconscious of everything except self being God. Before the soul loses its human state and gains the divine state of nirvakalp, I am God, it has to experience the vacuum state of nirvana. Nirvana is the infinite vacuum state where the soul is fully conscious of real nothing. Nirvana is immediately and inevitably followed by nirvakalp, phila, where the soul is fully conscious of real everything. So, fana or nirvana is experiencing nothing as it. All your sanskaras are gone, and you experience the pure nothing. And nirvana follows immediately after that, and then you experience the everything. It's those two key terms. Nirvana and Nirvakalp are so irrevocably linked and tied together that each one can be said to be the divine goal. False nothing equals illusory everything. You see, the false nothing projects itself before our eyes as the false everything. You see, we say this is everything, and this is ignorant because everything is God. But we take everything to be what appears before our eyes. Real nothing equals neither everything nor nothing. Real everything equals God the infinite. Okay, I won't try to read the rest of it. We'd have to spend some time unpacking it. But I don't know, are you guys getting some of this? These four terms: everything, nothing, nothingness, and the false everything. That, in a nutshell, is Baba's metaphysics, you could say. I've given it in a simplified form here. But
So isn't that nirvana illumination?
Is it what?
Illumination also is called illumination.
Well, I mean, you could, but the way Baba is characterizing it here, it's liberation. You're liberated from the round of birth and death. But you don't experience the I am God state. What you experience is nothing. You realize...
I imagine that experience is like an explosion of light right before you, and then it goes away, that explosion of light, and you realize that. Something
Well,
that's how I imagine it.
Not having experienced it myself,
But I just say that the way
but I would think things like that would happen leading up to nirvana. But when you experience nirvana, the experience is of the nothing. Baba said it is the only state in which nothing exists. He said it's the only state in which God does not exist. But since God has to exist in every state, God exists there as consciousness. There is consciousness and nothing else. That's nirvana. But the next moment it's followed by the experience of the everything, the I am God state.
So everything fills up that space?
Everything what?
Everything fills that the nothingness at that point?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you could say fills. The thing is, the nothing doesn't exist. But then you experience what does exist, which is the everything.
Consciousness, which you call it everything.
Huh?
Which is consciousness. You say consciousness exists in nothing.
Well, in nirvana, God exists as consciousness, yeah. But,
Which He is everything. So
but
that means in nirvana, everything exists.
nothing
in the sense of
exists.
God. It's not the experience, but it's there. No?
Well, your experiences of the nothing.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, experience is not there, but consciousness is there.
Yeah, no, consciousness is there, and God exists there as consciousness. Yeah.
Consciousness is there, but it has no object.
It has no object, yeah. You're not conscious
So
of
there's nothing-
anything. It's a non-dual state. The subject-object distinction is gone, and there's just consciousness. But then the next moment, you have the I am God. Consciousness and God then are identical. I am God.
So would you say it is the true death state?
Yeah, that's the real death, yeah.
The real death. And it's a very frightening thought for the mind that has no
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
It's terrifying
Yeah.
to think of there nothing could possibly be the only thing. But it has to follow then that everything then is realized, because everything is only one thing, and it's God.
Yeah. So it follows the very next moment, as Baba
Yeah,
said.
can't help but follow.
So,
And here are
I'm
some of-
sorry, I know it gets a little bit long, you didn't want to probably spend time on this. But, so the way it goes is nirvana happens and then nirvana samadhi comes in?
Yeah, it follows, yeah.
So although they live together, but that nothing has to happen before everything comes
Yeah,
in.
you experience nirvana first, yeah. Baba did say in God Speaks in the supplement that people who get nirvana and die in that state, then after death get mukti. That is infinite
Because there is no
bliss.
more samskara left.
Huh?
Because there is no more samskara left. probably.
Well, in nirvana there's no sanskaras
So we
either.
can get
But you get mukti, which is the experience of infinite bliss. This is the whole big topic. If you want to get into it, wait until tomorrow morning when we talk about knowledge, power, bliss. You only get 1 for 3. Whereas Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you're experiencing knowledge, power, bliss, as a matter of fact. But there's some very nice treatments of this in the Everything and the Nothing. That's a lovely book, and it presents some of these ideas in a very accessible form. And you can see here, right, the 1 and the 0, right? You get the God is generally spoken of as being one. We use the term one as being the opposite to the many. One we name reality of God. Many we name illusion or creation. However, strictly speaking, no number, not even one, can depict one who is indivisibly one without a second. Even to call the one is incorrect. We do not speak of the ocean as one, it is just ocean. The one simply is. Do you get the idea there?
Yeah.
Baba's saying when we say one, it sort of implies two. But this is a one where the two is impossible, is unimaginable. So actually one doesn't really convey it either. The one is one complete whole and simultaneously a series of ones within the one. Okay? There's like, okay, let me give a series of ones within the one. Meher Baba, Upasani Maharaj, Hazrat Babashan, Sai Baba of Sharadi, who have I left out? Tajuddin Baba, Narayan Maharaj. Those are all one, right? And they're all ones within the one. Every jiva, every shivatma is a one within the one. The one.
So one called here what?
Huh?
The capital one. If they are.
You know, I can't hear you very well.
If those the small one is called Shivadma, which are inside the capital one, what is one called here? Paramatma?
Let's just go on reading because they're all the same actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Illusion is zero and simultaneously a series of zeros within the zero. These zeros have no value except a false value according to their position in relation to the one. In actual fact, the zeros have no existence. Their existence is mere appearance illusion, the big zero. Okay, so Baba's, okay, this is kind of a very quick explanation of the one and the zero and the appearance of a manyness in both of these. And this is the diagram he gives. But the next one, Baba goes on with this a bit. And here's his diagram. So this is the original real everything, right? And within the original real everything is the original real nothing, right? Why is it real? Because it isn't real at all. It's non-existent. But there's no illusion in it. There's no manifestation. It simply does not exist at all in the real state. But here we start to get the illusion, right? This is the false everything, or innumerable nothings. That's this entire world we experience. And these TN means temporary nothing, temporary nothing, temporary nothing. What's a temporary nothing? Well, it's 8 minutes, 23 seconds after 3. And now another temporary nothing, 8 minutes, 27 seconds after 3, like that. Or I just blinked. Or I see Reza. Or I see Sam. Or I picked up this. These are all temporary nothings. The entire experience of illusion is temporary nothings, right? They don't exist. They're manifestations of nothing, but they appear to us as real moment by moment by moment. And they're all contained within the false everything, which is the entire empirical universe. So, to reiterate this point, it's a false everything because we are mistaking the everything for this. We think it's real, right? Don't you think it's real? Don't you think this room is, don't you think your body is real? Don't you think like the difference between you and the person next to you is you're not that person? Doesn't that seem real to you? It's not real at all. This is totally illusory. This is the false everything, but we say it's real. But what is real is the real everything. And all of this happens through the medium of the nothing. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But the original real everything is infinite and eternal. Being everything, it accommodates within itself the original real nothing, right? The original real nothing is within the everything. Nothing is the shadow of everything. Baba uses this language too, illuminationist language. The substance, everything being infinite and eternal, its shadow must also be infinite and eternal. At times, the shadow appears to be small, and at times to stretch into huge shapes. You guys have seen this, right? If the sun is setting and you're standing in the sun, your shadow is very, very long. But at noon, your shadow is almost non-existent. So it can appear to be huge or it'll be finite. But in either case, it's nothing but a shadow. But even when it seems to have disappeared, it is still within the substance latently. So if you're standing and the sun is directly overhead, you don't seem to have a shadow, but it's actually latently there. In the same way, the nothing is always latently present within the everything. Out of the nothing contained within the everything is projected infinite and eternal nothingness, the creation or false everything. The original real everything is one infinite and eternal, the original real nothing, being the real everything, is also infinite and eternal. But the false everything that is projected from the real nothing, comprising innumerable nothings or all things in creation, is innately and unendingly dual. Okay, I won't read the rest of this, but this is if you want to read more about this, this is a good short explanation to be found in the Everything and the Nothing. That
Can you
book.
please explain the last sentence you read?
The false
All
everything.
the false everything that is projected from the real nothing, comprising, innumerable nothing. That dual part I don't understand.
Yeah, well,
dual.
this is within the world of many things. These shadows, like the shadow of you, there's your body, right? And there's Sonia in front of you. And there's maybe the fan, you can feel the air of the fan. So it's one of many things. It's dual. There's a multiplicity of things.
Oh,
Whereas
many
the
things.
everything, there's no duality there. It's one only. Remember Tawhid, the Islamic idea of Tawhid?
Yeah.
Baba's Tawhid has it that there is only God. That's the everything. And here's we're trying to deal with the imponderable, unimaginable question. If God is everything, how other things appear to be? And here's something he said about this in the Discourses that I find to be illuminating. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, this is in the Discourse, the beginning and the end of creation. It's a wonderful discourse. Okay, so here Baba is, let's see if we can make sense of this. Let's see. I'll read this as a lead-in. Even during the evolutionary period, the universe is in itself nothing but imagination, right? This entire universe doesn't exist. What you're seeing with your eyes at this moment, Baba is saying, doesn't exist. So he's going to address the question, can you get the significance of this? What you're looking at right now is not really there. What makes it seem to be there?
Or false thinking.
There is, in fact, only one indivisible and eternal reality and has neither beginning nor end. It It is beyond time. From the point of view of this timeless reality, the whole time process is purely imaginary, and billions of years which have passed and billions of years which are to pass do not have even the value of a second. It is as if they had not existed at all. Probably when you get God realized, you have this experience. So the manifold and evolving universe, okay, now here he's going to get to these points. So the manifold and evolving universe cannot be said to be a real outcome of this one reality. If it were an outcome of this one reality, reality would be either a relative term or a composite being, which it is not. So you get the point he's making. This, what we see, is not a real outcome, because if it were real, then the reality would be one term of two terms, right? But only the reality exists. So it's not a real outcome of it.
So
Yeah.
it's like a deformed reality.
What's that?
It's like a deformed reality.
Yeah, it's an illusory reality. It's an appearance of reality, but it's not a reality, actually.
Or projection.
Yeah, a projection of it. The one reality is absolute, and he's going to go on giving more on this. The one reality includes in itself all existence. It is everything, but it has nothing as its shadow. So what you're looking at is a shadow, not the real light at all. Okay. The idea of an inclusive existence implies that it leaves nothing outside its being. When you analyze the idea of being, you arrive by implication at the idea of that which does not exist. This idea of non-existence or nothing helps you to define clearly our notion of being. The complementary aspect of being is thus non-being or nothing, right? So we were dealing with the nothing again. But nothing cannot be looked upon as having its own separate and independent existence. It is nothing in itself, nor can it in itself be the cause of everything. So Baba wants to say the reality can't have a real outcome, and the nothing, since it doesn't exist, can't cause anything, right? So where does this come from? The nothing doesn't create it, the everything doesn't create it, and the nothing, being nothing, can't create anything. Where does this appearance of a world, this is the experience we're having this very instant. Where does this come from? The manifold and evolving universe cannot be the outcome of nothing taken by itself, and you have seen that it also cannot be the outcome of the one reality. How then does the manifold and evolving universe arise, right? How does all this that we experience, where does it come from? The manifold and evolving universe arises from the mixing of the one reality and nothing. It springs out of nothing when this nothing is taken against the background of the one reality. And I get a certain image of my mind about this. Okay, you've got the everything, right? The everything exists, infinite light, let's say. And you've got the nothing, which does not exist at all. Well, when you're looking, it's like the nothing is an infinitely thin film behind which is the everything. I'm bringing up this metaphor. This infinitely thin film doesn't exist at all. But when I look at it with the everything behind it, appearances appear within that film of the nothing, right? It's because the everything is in the background of it that the nothing gives us appearances. The nothing doesn't cause it, and the everything doesn't create it because it's not real, but it appears to us. Does this make any sense to you guys?
As much as it can.
Right. I mean, this is unimaginable stuff. But this is one of the good explanations Baba
Not like
gave.
the shadow. It's more like a shadow.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Shadow, because if you project the shadow, changes constantly. So and that's what's happening in the universe. It changes constantly.
And one thing about a shadow, we're going to come to illuminationism in a second, but a shadow does not exist, right? A shadow is an absence. It is an absence of light. So thus, when you look at the nothing with the everything in the background, and that's actually what we do, because we're really God, and we're really looking out to see God. When we look at the nothing with the everything behind it, these illusions and appearances manifest to us, but they are completely illusory and they don't exist at all. So this room does not exist. The people around you don't exist. Your own body doesn't exist. It's all created in this kind of way. Yeah.
So if this room doesn't exist, I'm sorry if I ask this irrelevant, but if this room doesn't exist, you don't exist, I don't exist, right? Because we're nothing. But we are the shadow of everything. Where is that everything? What do you call everything in this room?
You're actually not nothing, you're everything.
But once I'm not experiencing it.
Yes, but you're deluded into experiencing the nothing as if it was everything.
Right.
But you're actually everything. Yeah.
Well, that's what Baba says.
Huh?
That's what Baba says.
Yeah. No, Baba does say that, as a matter of fact. It is an outcome of nothing and is nothing. It only seems to have existence. Its apparent existence is due to the one reality which is, as it were, behind nothing, right? This is that metaphor. When nothing is added to the one reality, the result is the manifold and evolving universe. So, okay, this has been a kind of a cursory treatment. This is Baba's metaphysics. This is Baba's ontology, explaining what is real and why this appears to us. It's a mixing of the everything and the nothing, or it's seeing the nothing with the everything in the background, which creates this screenplay, it's like the cinema, this projection. Yeah, good for Hollywood. It's like on this screen you get the appearance of a show going on, but it really isn't there at all. That's what our experience is. Every instant, that's what we're actually experiencing.
And I think where that's, the most useful for people who struggle with this notion is when you look at a TV show or a film, you get involved in it,
right,
and you start to believe that it's real.
Right. Baba often used that. In Infinite Intelligence, he uses that. He says, for example, back in those days, you had to crank the film projector, right? Nowadays, of course, it's digital, but so Baba gives the image of someone cranking, the films they used to use, and watching it, and the guy cranking it has forgotten that he's cranking it, and he gets so absorbed. I think he uses the example, like there's a horrible train, there's a villain who's tied a fair damsel to a railway tracks, and the train is bearing down on him, and the hero comes and at the last instant cuts her loose, and all that kind of thing. And you're watching, you're so excited, but then it stops and it's completely gone. And it never happened at all, but you totally took it to be real.
And your heart is pounding.
And your heart is pounding and all of that, but it never happened. That's what all of this is. It's all nothing, It's, in fact, in Infinite Intelligence, Baba uses this phrase, everything pretending to be nothing. Because it's actually, I'm everything, I'm God, and I'm pretending to be nothing. I'm pretending to be this illusory body in this illusory world with this illusory experience.
But we don't know that we're nothing.
Yeah. So it's the ignorance that creates all of this. Now, Baba gave another system So here are some of these terms again. Let's see, no, it's not here. Okay, so these are the four terms: the everything, the nothing, nothingness, and the false everything, right? We've been talking about that. So if you want Baba's metaphysics in a nutshell, this is it. If you get, so these two belong to the domain of the real, right? Because the everything is real, and the nothing belongs to the domain of the real, but it doesn't exist at all. So you actually have only one meaningful term here. And these belong to the domain of the illusory, the false, of ignorance, where the everything, the nothing manifests as nothingness, and then it projects out on the screen of our experience as the false everything. Okay. Well, Baba, in that book, In God's Hand, gave an alternate set of terms for this, which actually are a bit helpful. And this is what's called an illuminationist metaphysics. Where is that? Yeah. So this is, I'll just show you that here, these are the pages where Baba is talking about this. This is Baba's own handwriting. Yeah. So he actually brings it up right from the very first page. But these are the four corresponding terms which Baba uses: natural light, natural darkness, unnatural darkness, and unnatural light. And this is helpful in some ways. So they actually correspond exactly to what we've just been talking about right here. So the everything is the natural light. The nothing is the natural darkness, right? So if you think about it this way, you've got light. Well, what is darkness? The absence of light, right? Darkness doesn't have any positive content. It's just a lack. So the nothing is comparable to the natural darkness. So the natural light, which is God, the everything of God, contains darkness within itself inevitably. Baba would say, if it didn't contain, he says about the everything, if it didn't contain nothing, it couldn't be everything. But nothing is actually really and truly nothing. In the same way, light contains darkness. But all that darkness is the absence of light. It's not a positive element at all. And these are both in the domain of the real. And the unnatural darkness projects itself as, the natural darkness projects itself as unnatural darkness. And that again is our mind, the world of the mind. Most of us are not directly conscious of our mind, right? I mean, we're aware of thoughts having arisen or desires having, isn't that true of you guys? I mean, you don't directly see them, but I'm aware that they're percolating out. But the thoughts of the mind then come out as the light we see out here, the unnatural light, which is the world we see with our eyes. And it means the lights, the scent, the smells, the sounds, the touches, the tastes, everything. That's all the unnatural light. So the natural light contains the natural darkness. And the natural darkness, when Maya comes into play, projects itself as the unnatural darkness, which projects itself on the screen of our experience as the unnatural light. Right? You follow that?
Isn't it the nothing, the shadow of God?
What's that?
Isn't it the nothing, the second, the shadow of God?
Yeah, you could use the word shadow, yeah. And Baba often uses this illuminationist language, shadows, yeah. The darkness you could call a shadow if you want, and Baba...
The question I have, why do we have a shadow of God? How does he get a shadow?
Well...
From what?
Well, Baba just seems to say that it is in the nature of light to contain darkness. All that darkness is the absence of light. And, but the thing is, the absence doesn't really exist.
So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Where does the shadow come from?
Yeah, well,
It sneaks out.
it's the inevitable consequence of there being light. The absence of light means a shadow.
But the light covers the shadow all the time.
Well, yeah, in this state it does. But, see, I haven't dealt with the question of ignorance here. But what happens is Maya intervenes, and the false eye, the eye experiences the darkness as if it was, actually experiences the unnatural light as if it was the natural light. I won't try to go too far into that because that would be a big discussion all by
That's what I
itself.
was trying to say, like
Nirvana is experiencing that. It's shocking.
The natural darkness.
It's too shocking that it's like.
Nirvana is experiencing the natural darkness. And that's followed immediately by experiencing the natural light. Yeah. So these are actually exactly corresponding terms. Baba used them as alternate ways of explaining the same thing in various places. I hope this is not too high-flown for everybody. Yeah. Hmm?
She got a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a question? No.
Yeah. Are you guys getting this sort of?
Yeah, of course. It's very
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna, these are the metaphysics of the everything and the nothing. So since, hoping that you've been sufficiently bewildered, we can move on now to thinking the imagination in infinite intelligence. And, yeah. And it corresponds in a lot of ways. Okay. So, in fact, I'll start with this. This one. So this is really, I would say, one of the very core ideas in the book Infinite Intelligence. And part of understanding it means coming to terms with the words thinking and imagination. Baba's using these words in a very specialized way. So your ordinary understanding of them, just throw it away for the time being. What Baba means by thinking is something like primordial consciousness, your basic consciousness. It's not thinking versus feeling, nothing like that. And the imagination is his term for nothing. It really means the same thing. And the nothing exists in two different states. It exists in the latent state and it exists in the manifested state. So when you're sound asleep, the imagination is latent, right? It's gone back into the fine state. You're totally unconscious of it. But when you're awake, the imagination manifests as the false everything. It's really the same thing as that, actually. The imagination does not exist. It is absolutely nothing. And it's either latent or it's manifested. But the thinking, or the consciousness, or the I does exist. That is, you are real. But what you experience is not. The imagination is not real. Right? So that's what actually, okay, this diagram goes to show evolution. Yeah.
Are you saying that we are an aspect of God? When you say we are real, we are as a soul, a drop soul, we're an aspect of God, or?
I would go beyond that and say you are God. You don't have to put the aspect in. You are God. That's what Baba tells us. And the word thinking refers to that there. Thinking actually means consciousness, and consciousness in this book means God. So Baba uses this funny term, the thinking, right? Well, the thinking is like a drop soul, and it is identical with God. Whereas the imagination is nothing. It absolutely does not exist at all. And in fact, I'm going to go to this chart because it's better for this. So what this is showing is, should I show the lion after all? What do you want, the lion or the crossing lines?
Crossing lines, if you can read us those.
Let's do the lion. Okay. Baba's giving this as an illustration of thinking the imagination, right? Well, the lion here is the imagination, right? And in the original state of the imagination, it's latent. That is, it's an infinitely finite point of nothing. It's nothing. It's the same thing as the nothing we had before with the capital N, right? But when you're a stone, here's the I is the thinking, right? Which is to say, the Atma, or the real self. I know if you can get the idea that the thinking means consciousness, consciousness means I, and I means God. They're all the same. Do you follow that? I am God, and my consciousness is identical with me. And thinking is the word Baba uses for that. Okay, so this represents the thinking. And here's a door. A door is blocking the experience of things. And the hole in the door is the form. Now, if you can get this idea, you know what a form is, like you identify with your body, right? You guys are all identifying with your body right now, right? Like, you know, that's my finger, I can wiggle it. Why is it? Because I'm my body and I can wiggle my finger. I pinch myself. Ooh, it hurts. That's because I'm my body. Our body is actually an opening. And what is it an opening to? To the experience of the imagination, right? Like you're experiencing this room right now, right? Well, your body is the opening through which you, the real self or God, can experience it. Through your 5 senses, it opens the door so that you can experience this room. Do you get that idea? The body is an opening. That's its purpose. It's a way that your soul can experience things, right? So that's what Baba is, he's showing it. In stone form, the opening is tiny. And the thinking in stone form can only experience the tiniest little bit of the lion. A tip of hair on the mane of the lion's head. But here's the total imagination. Most of it is unmanifested. But in this rooster is, hot stuff. Cock-a-doodle-doo, right? The form is much bigger. The opening is bigger. So now the rooster can experience more and more of the imagination. See, this is the imagination. All of this is latent and unmanifested, whereas the colored part is what is experienced. So a rooster can experience much more of the imagination. Are you following this idea? Right? The imagination is latent but complete from the beginning, but it's experienced progressively. But in human form, the door is wide open, and the I, the thinking, can experience the imagination completely. You can experience the whole thing, right? Now, that's because in human form, we can experience anything. You do it one thing at a time. You don't do it all simultaneously. But I mean, look at the world right now and look at all the aspects of the imagination that are being brought out there. The human mind can experience anything in the imagination at all. It's unlimited. But what is the problem? Why isn't it realizing God? Well, it is not realizing God because it's experiencing the imagination, right?
Which it takes to be real.
Yeah, which it takes to be real. It's experiencing the false everything as if it were the real everything. And what is the real everything? God. So we're saying you are God to all that we experience. We're investing reality in it, right? We're attributing reality to what we experience, right? Don't you do that? Like if you're out in the street and a car is barreling down at you at 80 miles an hour, you think it's real, don't you? Right? You're attributing reality to something which is imaginary. And that's what happens here. So this is realizing the imagination. I'm having to just kind of go quickly through this. You have to read all of Infinite Intelligence and torment yourself for a couple of years, and then you really get this. But Bobby uses the term realize. You realize the imagination, and it's a very good word because, in other words, you attribute reality to it. See, realize? It's a nice use of the word. You get the idea? To realize the imagination means I am attributing reality to the imagination even while I am experiencing it. Through my experiencing it, I am attributing reality to it. But it's not real, right? It's completely imaginary, right? This room doesn't exist at all. What is real? Me. I'm real. I'm the everything. I'm the reality with a capital R. I'm the everything with a capital E. But I keep investing my own reality in the things that I experience that are completely imaginary. This is thinking the imagination. That's what Baba means by it. I don't know if you followed this idea, but again, to say, like, let's suppose I'm a turtle. There's a little turtle there, and so I am actually the everything. I am actually God. But I look at that turtle form and say, that is me. We're all doing this right now. When you identify with your bodies, you're doing it at this very instant because you're thinking the imagination. You look at that form and I say that turtle is hot stuff. I'm that turtle. And having identified with that turtle through the eyes and nose and ears of the turtle, I experience this room, right? Has a deficiency of puddles, if you ask me. I think the LA Center should provide some nice puddles for turtles who might happen to be here. So by identifying with the body, that is, by looking through this hole, it experiences the environment, which is this room. And the environment does not exist. It is imaginary. That is thinking the imagination, right? I don't know, are you guys getting this idea, thinking the imagination? So you could say it's a two-step process. First, the I, which is God, not ignorant, not knowing myself, identifies with the body, and through the body experiences the universe as its object. And the universe is the imagination and does not exist. And through this process, the thinking attributes reality to the body and to the universe. And it is completely false thinking because neither of those things exist. The only thing that really exists is the one who is doing it. That's the story of us. Yeah.
So the question comes up is, why do we, although I am everything and real, right?
Yeah.
But why do I think the imagination?
Okay, let's, I'd like to get to the creation narratives that speak precisely to that.
Yeah, let's talk about
That question.
Yeah.
So that'll come out a little later now.
Okay.
But this is the process that happens. Now that's what this diagram is showing, and I think this is a really important diagram.
Yeah.
This is the crossing lines of thinking and imagination, right? You've got what thinking is, right? Thinking is me. It's the consciousness of me. It is the consciousness that is me. And me has a capital M, means God, right? So this is the line of thinking here. And in its original state, what this circle means is thinking is identical with the totality. This is the infinite intelligence, that's the God term. So thinking is identical with the totality or the everything. In its original state, thinking equals everything with a capital E, right? You get that? That's what this is showing here. Whereas the imagination, you see, it's in the gap. It's nothing. The imagination is the own point, an infinitely finite point of nothing. You know, a point has no dimensions, right? It doesn't have any length or breadth or depth. It doesn't actually exist. So the imagination doesn't exist. But what happens when creation starts is that through the own point, which is right here, the infinitely fine imagination gets projected as the universe. This means the gross universe and the subtle. There's no mental universe in this portrait of things, just don't worry about that for the time being. So this point of nothing gets projected as the entire universe. And this happens in one instant. And why does it happen in one instant? Because it never happens at all. And why does it never happen at all? Because it doesn't exist, right? The universe doesn't exist. The creation doesn't exist. It just is projected as an illusory everything, right? But the thinking does exist. We're talking about the everything and the nothing. You see the relationship here? This is like the nothing and this is the everything. So the thinking, which is the everything, does exist. It's the real I, the real self with a capital S. But what it does when creation starts is it identifies itself with an infinitely finite form, like the electron form, most primitive finite form. It looks at that electron and says, that is me. I am that. And by identifying with this form, then it experiences its environment. Now, an electron doesn't experience very much. You know, you've got to become like a worm before you experience much of anything. But the principle is there. You identify with the form, and through the form experience a tiny bit of the infinite imagination. Now, this, you see in all of these circles, right? You see the little blue at the center, right? The blue dot at the center. Do you know what that means?
No.
That refers to the real self. We see this is blue also. The colors don't quite show up properly here. It's the real self which is at the core. And that's true of all of us. Like, you've got a real self, but you identify with your mental body, subtle body, and gross body. That's what these circles are. You identify with those, even though they don't exist. And you say, that's me.
What exists?
Huh?
Exist. Exist.
I can't make out what you're saying.
Exist.
exists.
Yeah, the point that exists.
Yeah, that's right. This exists. This is the real existence. This is the real.
The potential.
Yeah. But it is identifying with a body. You see, the subject-object dichotomy comes into existence here. So there's me and there's you, right? That's constant part of our experience through billions of years. We go on and on doing this. I am land. I am not Mahu. I am not this chair. There's me and there's you. And that's completely ignorant, but that goes on from the beginning of the story till the end. But you identify with the body and you experience through the medium of the body the infinite imagination in whatever amount of it you can manage at a particular time. Like if I'm a turtle and I get into a pond, well, the infinite imagination to me is the little part of the pond that I can swim around in. But, you know, as I become a human being, I can travel to India and travel to the moon, and I can go all sorts of places. You know, your scope becomes greater and greater. So, but the thing is, if you know the opening sections of God Speaks, Baba says, the first experience of the soul, the first sanskara, weren't you asking about that? It experiences itself as a most finite form, right? Well, the soul's experience, Baba says, is one of contrariety. Baba uses that word. Well, you know, contrariness. Why would it experience contrariety? Well, this is why. Because I am infinite God, and I am experiencing myself as a most finite form. Something is wrong here. I smell a rat. I'm not really this.
It has to be a very dramatic.
Yeah.
It is dramatic.
It's absolutely the opposite of what I really am. But the problem is that I have only the tiniest little spark of consciousness. So it's my experience of contrariety is unavailing, you know. So what do? Well, I experience myself as a slightly bigger form and get more sanskaras. And that too is not right. It's not me. It's not me. So I get more. You see the driving force here? Actually, you're bringing up the question. The driving force is, this is not right. This is not who I really am. There is something wrong here. And you get more and more and more and more and more consciousness, more and more sanskaras, and a more and more developed form. And that's what all of this is. Thinking the imagination, more and more and more and more, up until you get to human form when reincarnation starts, right? And then you've got complete consciousness. I was just talking about this earlier in the divine theme. You're completely awake. But the problem is, you were just a monkey last lifetime. Last lifetime, when I was a monkey and I saw Mahu, I threw a coconut at her. Did I hit you?
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah.
She owes you one.
Yeah. And she, in a loving spirit, offered me a banana. But I just threw another coconut, right? So the thing is, when as a human being, you're basically a human monkey, you know. You've got the most, you know, primitive, gross sanskaras. So you reincarnate for 8 million lifetimes until you decide you want something better than that. But that's this whole stage. You think the imagination infinitely until you learn to get rid of the experiences, and then instead of you get what thinking the imagination is? Do you get that phrase? That is, I think I am conscious of the imagination as if it were real. That's what thinking the imagination means. And it's a two-step process. I identify with the form, and through the form, I experience the universe, and I attribute reality to all of this, when none of it is real. The only thing that's real is me. I am the real reality in this picture. This is actually a very confirming vision of the self that we're getting, you know. The you who's looking out of this is no one other than God. But everything that you experience is completely illusory. And this is the process by which it is happening. I'm trying to explain what we really need to spend like 3 or 4 days, so I hope some of this is making some sense.
No, it's really good. Thank you.
It's actually a very deep and very beautiful idea. Yeah, did you want to?
Yeah, I saw a video recently of, I remember seeing this as a kid, of cell mitosis. And cell splits. So it would start off with one cell, right? And then the egg and the sperm come together. Next you have 2 cells. Then they tremble. They literally tremble, and boom, there's 4. And then that little cluster trembles, and then boom, there are 8. And it keeps going like that until you have a body, right? So it's a force that they can't really identify that causes it.
Yeah.
But what causes it, in Baba's explanation, is the need to be more conscious.
Mm-hmm.
The requirement to be more conscious.
Yeah,
That's
right.
not enough of a form for me to realize who I am.
And why do you need to be more conscious? Because of contrariety. No matter what we are experiencing, this is true of us right now. You might say, okay, you're here at this instant, and then I'm here at this instant, and then I decide to raise my hand. Well, why did that change happen? The change happened because in my depth of my soul, I was dissatisfied with the state that existed before. That's why I go on changing. No matter what I am experiencing, there is a part of me that knows this isn't the answer. That's contrariety that keeps driving us on and on. It's in our sanskaras. It's at the root of every sanskara. We know this is not right. This is not real. So things change. And then this isn't right, this isn't real, and it changes again. It happens for billions of years. So it's contrariety that keeps driving. The experience of contrariety creates restlessness. And restlessness drives us. And it goes on and on and on and on through every moment of your life, and then after you die, it still goes on, and you get born again. This is what is driving it.
But then, something magical happens.
Yeah.
You get tired of it.
And this starts, okay, here's another analogy. Yeah, you were asking about mirrors, right? Okay, so this is another analogy that Baba gave for it. This is an analogy, right? Baba's trying to explain thinking the imagination, right? If you get that. I hope that that phrase is starting to mean more. Thinking means being conscious of by identifying with, and the imagination is the nothing. It's latent when you're sound asleep, and it's manifested when you're awake. Either way, it is nothing. It doesn't exist, but it appears to, right? So in this case, okay, Baba used these 2 terms, creating and realizing. And he has a special meaning for these. I've already talked about realizing, right? Realizing means that you're thinking the imagination and you're attributing reality to it, right? You believe that this room exists and that you believe that your body exists. That's realizing. Well, what creating refers to is taking the imagination in this original state here as a point of nothing, right? That's the fine imagination, Baba calls it. And projecting it out as if it were the infinite universe. Baba calls it the infinite imagination and the universe. He calls it that. And we'll get to this tomorrow. This is actually done by an aspect of God called Ishwar, or the third state of God. It's actually, there's a part of God that does that. We'll get to that later. But in one instant, the entire universe is created. But
I'm sorry, where? At the own point P?
through the own point,
B, yeah.
B. Through the own point, the entire universe is created. And here's something Baba has said about evolution. He said, there is no evolution of form. All the forms are created right from the beginning. There is an evolution in the realization of forms. You see the difference? That is to say, the little paramecium Linda, right, suddenly says, I'm not going to be a paramecium. I'm going to be plant. Right? So you identify with a higher form, and then you say, I'm not going to be a plant. I'm going to be a worm, by God. And but all those forms are already there. It's just that nobody ever said, I'm that. It's kind of unimaginable. This, I know, I'm giving you lots of unimaginable
That's right.
things.
So the forms are there, so what do we do, as that finite one?
Well,
We identify with
you
it
identify
through the
with it.
realization.
But what you identify with was already created. It's just that nobody was at home.
Uh-huh.
Nobody inhabited.
Word, is it the evolution of consciousness then?
Yes, the evolution of consciousness proceeds through the realization of forms. And that consciousness belongs to the thinking. That's the real side of things.
That's where the two
But the
mixes.
forms that you identify, Baba says, are all created at once. It's just that nobody ever identified with them before. It's sort of unimaginable how you can have a created form with nobody at home. But in fact, it is the case. They're all, you could call them potential existence. They're all potentialities.
Virtual
Yeah.
is what scientists are actually. They're actually calling it virtual particles.
Well,
They don't exist.
maybe it does correspond to that. That could be, yeah. So everything is created all at once, but the thing is, it would not be a universe in our experience because nobody is at home yet. Nobody identifies with it. Nobody has become it. Nobody experiences it. Do you get this idea?
Yeah.
Do you mean in the nothingness state?
This is the nothingness state actually manifested as the false everything. I won't even say the false everything. Well, okay, yeah, the imaginary everything. It's actually created, but nobody goes there. Nobody says, this is me. Nobody experiences it. So you might say it might as well not have been created, right? If nobody is conscious of it. It might as well not have been. But in fact, it was created by Ishwar. So that when Linda, the worm, says, I'm going to be a fish, right? Well, that form is there. It's already there. And you just identify with it. This is quite a new picture Baba has given, actually. This is creating and realizing. These are those key terms. God, as Ishwar, creates all these forms, and it can happen like that. And once again, why can it happen like that? Because it never happens at all. And why does it never happen at all? Because it does not exist. It's completely imaginary. But our process of realizing it takes immensities of time because we're investing our own reality in it. When you become Linda the trout, right? That trout form is completely imaginary, but you are real. And you are attributing to the trout form a reality that belongs to you. And through the trout form, you're experiencing a babbling brook of a sort that you've got gazillions of here in the LA area. I'm sure you go trout fishing all the time. So that's your universe, right? And you're attributing reality to that. And that doesn't exist either. The real part, you see, the real coloration, the vividness, the life to it is given by you, the thinking. That's what thinking the imagination means. if you're getting a clearer idea of this. See?
Where does Sanskara come in?
Huh?
Where does Sanskara come into the picture in this that you?
I'm going to wait on that
Okay.
because that it's very much part of this picture, but
Yeah.
it's enough to get the idea of thinking the imagination for the moment. I'm hoping this isn't. Well, I should say, I hope you feel totally bewildered. Do you?
That's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Of learning.
Okay. So that's what this shows. This is Jamshed, who represents infinite intelligence, right? So here, Jamshed's eyes are closed. That means Jamshed is sound asleep. This is the original beyond state, right? Now, Jamshed is creating the entire universe. And this would be as Ishwar, the third state of God. Everything is created all at once.
So he does everything.
Yeah. Because
do nothing.
But the reason that everything is created all at once is that nothing was ever created because it doesn't exist.
Oh.
That's why it can happen like that. But now, the yellow means creating, right? Creating means creating the imagination, turning the imagination from latency into manifestation, right? And it never happened at all. It's all imaginary. But now, Jamshed, the infinite intelligence, as the thinking starts to realize what Jamshed as the creator has created. Jamshed begins to, like Jamshed, let's take Rosie the atom, right? And Rosie looks out and says that atom and says, yeah, man, that's me. And she identifies with the atom, and through the atom starts to experience the molecule, or whatever the heck atoms experience. Probably not much. So that's what this is. And Baba gave this figure, it's an analogy. It's like, in this state, infinite intelligence can't experience anything yet, because it creates everything, but it doesn't experience anything, because it doesn't have a medium through which to experience, right? But now, Rosie the atom, which would make you a uranium? How do you feel about being a uranium atom?
Oh, sure.
All right. She's a ticker. Tick, tick, you know, the uranium. Okay, so Rosie the uranium, this is the form of the uranium atom, right? Mm-hmm. And she identifies with that and starts to experience, she hears the atom right there, a tiny bit of the imagination through the medium of that body, right? And meanwhile, the entire imagination is being created by Ishwar. But Rosie the atom only experiences a little tiny bit of it because her body is so small and so limited. Okay. Now, Rosie the lily pad has got a much bigger body, and as Ishwar, infinite intelligence, is creating the entire universe, is creating everything. But Rosie the lily pad experiences a good bit more. Now here she is, an ape, right? Rosie the ape is experiencing most of the imagination because consciousness is mostly complete. But now, Rosie, the human being, experiences, so she's a little boy here, as a human form experiences the entire imagination. One bit at a time, you know, you don't do it all at once. It's one at a time, everything, right? Infinite, but why is Rosie not God realized? Because she's thinking the imagination. And the imagination doesn't exist. The imagination is not false. The imagination is non-existent. What is false is believing it to be real. That's where the falseness comes in. So the creation of the imagination is not false, but the realization of the imagination is false. So now we have Rosie the human who is thinking falseness infinitely. It's complete. She's wide awake, but she's completely identifying with the imagination. What needs to happen is the mirror needs to shatter. She needs to stop realizing the imagination and start realizing herself. This is Jamshed. You see a very self-satisfied Jamshed because he's just had God realization. When you think yourself, then you are God realized, and that happens when the sanskaras are gone and the imagination disappears and you realize yourself. So that's how Baba explained thinking the imagination in infinite intelligence. How is this sitting with you guys? Okay? So you see, thinking and imagination are really big words in Meherabade's account of things.
So did we all imagine you here
Yeah.
doing this presentation? Is there any shared imagination, or all of you are part of my imagination?
Yeah, I know. It's a very big question, and in Meherabode we might start to get to it. But Baba did say in Creationist Causes, Baba said, now I'm going to give you a secret. Each individual is his own universe. Universe. So what I take that to mean, that every one of us, the entire universe exists for us. And when we realize God, that entire universe and Ishwar all vanish. So there's a radical individualization of this. But Baba never explained this, but there must be some provision for all these individualized experiences to be interacting. And it must happen somehow through Ishwar. But I'm just speculating, and it's sort of too difficult a topic to go into here. Yeah. But apparently this entire universe exists just for you.
Just for us? You mean each one of us?
For each one.
Have
for each
our
one,
own universe.
The entire universe exists
is within us. Baba
just
said
for you. Yeah.
But of course, there's only one.
Yeah. In fact, every self is really the same. But there's a radical individualism of this. And when you realize God, you realize everything in the entire universe vanishes. And Ishwar vanishes also. This is a question that is really going to have to get worked out by Baba lovers in the future, how you get a collectivity of individuals. But there seems to be a radical individualization of the universal. That's how I understand it.
So all of this happens for the growth of our consciousness?
Well, yeah, okay.
All the work that Ishwar is doing?
For the growth and then for the involution of it, yeah.
Involution of it.
And
so
then
finally we can, shatter the
mirror and the realized self, yeah.
So the state is where everybody's at.
What?
The state is where we are, all are, everybody at.
Yeah.
This is us.
It's completely aware of falsehood. To me, that's what it means.
Yeah.
That it's being completely aware of
falsehood, yeah.
Being conscious of falsehood.
Yeah, that's right. Or you could say being falsely conscious. Falsely experiencing the imagination as if it were real. That's what we're all doing. Yeah. Unless there are some of you here are God realized. Anybody here God realized? Oh, okay, you're God realized.
Just like to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So this.
Yeah, I want to say something humorous. Humorous, as Baba said. It's in Tiffin Lecture I selectively. So, like in one of the gathering, Baba asked this person, I'm paraphrasing, I don't completely remember the detail, but says, do you know some prison in India? And one says, like for example in Nasik, and the other one in Bombay,
Yeah.
and Baba says, no, the real prison is your gross body.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the
right.
real prison.
Which is this.
Which is this. So
That's
it really is.
Mm.
You think?
Okay, that's a very quick, delving into thinking the imagination. But if you can get that idea, that would really open up the book, Infinite Intelligence, to you. A lot of it is centering on this, thinking the imagination, what all that means. Now, here are some other, I'll have, just a little, so here's a schematic of what we were just talking about, right? Infinite intelligence in that book is Baba's God term. It means God. He hardly ever uses the word God. He uses infinite intelligence. And the original division is between thinking and imagination. And you could say, this is the everything and this is the nothing. Thinking is real and imagination is not real. And as we go further, okay, thinking begins with finite false thinking. Jivatmas in the evolutionary series, like starting with Adam going on to metal, vegetation, etc., up to human. Then infinite false thinking, ordinary humans. It's infinite because the consciousness we have is actually infinite. We have infinite consciousness. The problem is that what we are conscious of is non-existent, is most finite. That's what's finite. The problem is not our consciousness. The problem is what we're conscious of. Earlier, in earlier forms, the consciousness was still limited, That's why animals can't do the things people can. They don't have infinite consciousness yet. But the moment you become a human being, you have infinite false consciousness. But once you get rid of the falseness, you become infinite real thinking. Shivatmas. A Shivatma means a God-realized soul. And Jivatmas are ordinary bound, ignorant souls. So this is where thinking leads to. Thinking goes to finite false thinking, to infinite false thinking, through infinite real thinking. This is the journey of the soul from stone to God realization, right? This is the divine theme between these three. Okay? This is really what God speaks, talks about in the main part. It's mostly concerned with the journey of the soul. It brings in many other things too. It's a magnificent book. But its focus is mostly on this side of things. But there's the other side to the story that God speaks, doesn't tell us much about. Not getting to what we get that's new from the stuff from the 20s, right? There we get an explanation of the imagination, this side of things. And in creation and its causes, we're told at length about Pran and Akash. Okay? Now, I don't know if any of you were here last year. Were any of you here last year when we talked about Pran and Akash?
Yes.
Lois was, yeah, Rosie and a couple. Okay. This is, the imagination doesn't exist. It's illusory. And it's comprised of two illusory components, Pran and Akash. Now, Pran is the same word that prana, like you do yoga and you cultivate your prana, so forth. And Akash means emptiness or space. But what these terms, Baba's using these terms again in a very deep way, or hollowness. And Pran is the event taking place there. Transformation. You could say Akash is the seed of space and Pran is the seed of time. Because happening implies time, right? Get that? Happening means there are different moments of time, or else nothing can happen if it's only one moment. So you get time and space with Pran and Akash. I'm going again in a very brief space over a big topic here, but does this make sense?
Sort of.
Yeah, this is the primordial dichotomy within the imagination. Why within the imagination? Because none of this exists. Within the reality, there is no space, there is no time. So it's only within the imagination that you can get prana and akash. So God Speaks doesn't go into this, but in Creation of Causes does. And what Baba says, if we had another sessions on this, we could read the passages, but Baba says, prana and akash separate and then they clash. There's a big clash. And the moment they clash, there's a flash of lightning. And the moment there's a flash of lightning, the jivatma, the soul, identifies with the form. That's when it happens. Prana and akash, there's no soul. There's no thinking. There's no consciousness. But when they clash and get together, a form results, and then thinking, the imagination starts. Yeah.
So if prana is movement, vibration, and akash is a hollowness, emptiness.
Yeah.
So perhaps, I'm just imagining, that is all imagination anyway. So this prana, which is a movement, moves toward this hollowness, but how could a clash happens when the movement and hollowness come together or clashes? I mean, how could a form be? I'm trying to understand it with my limited mind, so which is not possible probably, but how could the movement or vibration strikes with the emptiness or hollowness and create that big thing, which is universe?
Well, we're talking about things that are really at the very limits of what we can possibly understand.
Yeah.
But here is one metaphor that Baba used, and that is a bubble, right?
Bubble.
And if you think about, there's a drop, right? And what is a bubble? It's a drop with emptiness. Forget about the air part. Let's just call it emptiness inside. So what is the surface of the bubble? It's the water, right? And what's inside? Emptiness. Pran, akash. Thus, you get it?
Yeah.
So the surface, the shiny surface of the bubble is like the pran part. And the hollowness within is like the akash part. And when you get them together, you get a form, like a bubble. Yeah, Rosie, did you want to?
No, I'm just stretching.
You're stretching, yeah. You're probably moving on from another form.
If it's imagination, when we look at that bubble, we really think there's something round and shiny object or something which is not really.
Yeah, and this is just a metaphor, but somehow forms result. And if you're to ask the question, which I've asked many times, how can emptiness clash with anything?
Yeah.
Because when you think of a clash, you think of something with a surface to clash with something. But that's exactly what Akash doesn't have. So we're going to have the great Shankaras and Al-Ghazalis and St. Augustine's to come along and help us with this. But I kind of get this image in my mind. I think of there's somehow a pran moving along, wanting to do something, but having no space. And Akash as a potentiality, and that's all. And all of a sudden, boom! When they get together, there's a dynamism that happens. There's a flash, there's a clash, because they've joined into a form.
Maybe it's like a sperm and an ovum.
Yeah, it probably is. I bet you that is an instance of prana and akash. I bet anything that it is. I think we see this all over the place, yin and yang, in our created universe. Yeah. So out of this, and since we have only 2 minutes, I'll just go quickly. Out of this clashing of prana and akash, they clash with a flash of lightning here. Okay. And out of this, Baba said, come the 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth. So that's actually part of Baba's Darshana too, those 4 great elements. These all belong to the imagination, but at the same time, the thinking starts to think the imagination. The journey of the soul begins. If you are reading God Speaks, that would be the 4th state of God.
Because there is a form at that point.
A form, and a Jivatma has identified with it. It is starting to experience. When they clash, all of that occurs. Okay, and on the 2 Genesis stories, I'm going to have to just put a 2-minute version of this. But we've actually had the foundations for it. So I'll go back to this this diagram, which I think is such an important diagram. One of the Genesis stories is the one that, if we had time, I would read from the Bible and Quran, Kun Faya Kun, and other things like that, but there isn't time for that. So one of the Genesis stories, the one that Baba lovers would most know, is the one that we get in God Speaks, and there's a version of it in Discourses, and it goes all the way back to 1929, where it appears in the Mirror Message. And that is, God from the primordial beyond state had the whim to know himself and asked, who am I? And the creation arose as a medium for experience, so that God could identify with one form after another. And that's the divine theme that follows, right? So maybe you guys may be familiar with that Genesis story. He calls it some places the original urge, but also the whim is a very good word, okay? That's the Genesis story that's best known. But the other Genesis story is what we were just talking about, Pran and Akash. That is, Pran and Akash separate, they clash, and out of that clash comes a flash of lightning, and the journey of the soul begins. And this is what I notice. When Baba, the Pran and Akash narrative, there's an important section on infinite intelligence, the beginning of series 6, 5 or 6 pages. But by far the most important treatment is in creation and its causes, especially the first 40 or 50 pages of that. But what I notice is that when Baba talks about Pran and Akash with the boys, the Meher Ashram boys, he never brings up the question, why does this happen? It never comes up once. Well, why not? Because this is the imagination, and the imagination doesn't exist and is completely unconscious. The question of why does not arise there. But the question of why does arise for the thinking. Because who is the thinking? The thinking is God, and God wants to know himself. So he asks, who am I, and goes through this journey. Whereas for this, Pran and Akash, there's no reason, because it never happened and it's all imaginary. That's how I understand. So I think the Pran and Akash narrative is the Genesis story for the imagination. And the who am I whim narrative is the Genesis story for the thinking, right? You get that?
Yeah.
And this is why I think that infinite intelligence is really critical for an integrated darshana. God Speaks really focuses on this part, but there is also the imagination. And that's what this early stuff really fills in the story on. And with that, we are at 4:30.
Can you please repeat these 2 Genesis one more time, its correlation?
Okay, the Genesis story better known is the God Speaks and Discourses and beams from the spiritual panorama, who am I narrative. The whim, God's whim, where God in state 2A, if you're in the 10 states of God, of infinite unconsciousness, said, who am I? And that gave rise to the journey of the soul, where it eventually culminates in state 2B, I am God. God asked, who am I? And at the end of the journey experienced, I am God. That's the one Genesis story. The second Genesis story is the story of the imagination, where pran, which is energy or fullness, and akash, which is capacity or potentiality or opening or emptiness, separate and they clash. And with that clash, the journey of the soul begins. And the pran and akash are unconscious. There is they have no consciousness in themselves at all. So the question why they did it does not arise. So Baba doesn't bring up that question when he discusses this. But for the thinking, or the jivatma, or the drop soul, it's all about who am I? The question of the motivation is the reason for the whole thing. So the motivation is right in the original whim, who am I? That's the motivation. So the whim is telling the story of the thinking, the journey of the thinking, which is to say the divine theme, right? If you get that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the pran and akash is giving you the genesis of the imagination. And the imagination never happened because it doesn't exist. So those questions never arise. So those are Meherabade's two Genesis narratives. Okay.
But the first Genesis happened? The first urge, the who am I, happened, right?
Yeah.
But the second one didn't happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, the imagination doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
Okay, so tomorrow morning we'll get into cosmic architecture, the new topic. Okay, Jai Baba, everybody.
Thank you very much.